Good. So welcome, Sarah. Thank you so much for joining me today. How are you doing?
I'm all right, thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
I am so excited about your new book, which is out on the 16th of July. We'll talk about that in a moment. But yeah, so I know that you're a consultant psychiatrist, but I know a lot of people listening will be curious to know what exactly it is that you do day to day and what sort of people you help and what sort of issues you help people with.
So full time, that's right. I'm a consultant psychiatrist. So I work for the NHS, and I see people mainly in clinic, or I see them in A&E or at their homes, and I assess individuals with a whole host of mental health conditions. So everything from depression, anxiety, OCD, grief, PTSD, any any if someone is struggling with their mental health, then essentially they would go to their GP, and a GP would then help facilitate a referral to me. And on the side, I've kind of carved out this alternative career online, because a few years ago, I was finding that I was getting really frustrated with the amount of misinformation online. And I think with something as sensitive as mental health, it's so important that the right information is out there and that it's delivered by expert sources. So I started the Mind Medic 3 or 4 years ago and decided it was just going to be my way of debunking mental health myths, giving people practical tips and tools that they can incorporate into their everyday. So on the one hand, the day job, I'm seeing people every day and helping assess, treat, and treatment can be anything from psychological therapies to family therapies to, in severe cases, medication. And then the other hand, I've carved out this other career around kind of public education, thinking about ways that people can feel empowered to make those small changes at home.
Sounds amazing. I'm really curious. You mentioned about the myths that you wanted to debunk. Can you share a couple of the myths that you have seen, I don't know, spread around, whether it's social media or kind of like I don't know, it's like an urban myth or something that you really want to debunk? Can you share anything like that?
I suppose one of the common myths is around what a psychiatrist looks like or what they do. I think often there's this preconceived ideas that a psychiatrist just gets you into a room, lays you on a couch, and then is very quick to prescribe medication. And that's not the case at all, because there's lots of different avenues that we go down before we even consider medication. So that was one of the myths that I was really keen to debunk, was around how quick psychiatrists are to prescribe medication. And the other thing was around, if you feel down, if you feel anxious, then you must be depressed or you must have an anxiety disorder. And actually, what I really wanted to do is I wanted to normalize just normal human emotion. Every day we may experience moments when we feel sad or we feel worried or anxious. And I suppose it's the degree to which that impacts your everyday. So by the time someone comes to see me in clinic, it may be affecting areas such as schooling, it might be affecting their job, it might be affecting their friendships and relationships. And so I really wanted to kind of set aside and make clear the difference between feeling low and down, and then what would constitute, say a depressive or an anxiety disorder, which might need the support of a psychiatrist.
Right. And is that something that people should go and get diagnosed, I suppose, properly by a doctor to see whether it is just as kind of normal everyday worries or more, clinical anxiety or clinical depression?
I suppose what I would be interested in knowing, as a doctor, is how much those difficulties are impacting your everyday. So if you are feeling down or if you are feeling worried, but it's not getting in the way of you functioning. So it's not getting in the way of you getting up, getting dressed, showered, getting in the way of family life, you're able to go to work, and it's not distressing or impacting that level of functioning, then I would say keep an eye on it. But the moment it does change things, then I would probably seek advice for a doctor. So one of the exercises that I do is something called a day in the life of. And I always use the example of my 5-year-old to demonstrate this, because I think a lot of the time people think, what has a 5-year-old got to feel worried or down about? But it just demonstrates beautifully that you can pick up really subtle signs that things aren't right for you or for someone else. So for instance, she bounds into my bedroom nice and early, 6 o'clock in the morning. She's generally really, really content. She wants to get changed there and then. She wants to go downstairs, have a breakfast, watch her favorite cartoon. Now, I've given you a snapshot of what her morning routine's normally like. But if I was noticing that she wasn't bounding into my bedroom until 8 o'clock in the morning, that she seemed down or low or a little bit worried, maybe it was a real struggle to get her dressed on the morning. Maybe she was off her food and didn't really fancy watching her favourite TV programme. Immediately, there's something there that indicates that something's going on for her, whether it's with her physical health or her mental health. So what I would ask people to do is think about what their baseline is. What is the norm for them from the moment they wake up to the moment they go to sleep? And then also thinking about their sleep as well. And then by doing that, you can pick out changes relatively easily. So if you're noticing that you're someone that used to be really motivated, a lot of get up and go in the morning, but you're finding it's a real struggle, or maybe you're someone who never used to make mistakes at work and you're finding you're constantly being pulled up on mistakes that you're making, or maybe your boss has expressed concern for you. Maybe you're someone that used to be able to fall asleep relatively okay on an evening, but finding that you're struggling a little bit more. So already you've generated a list of things that may indicate that something's not quite right and may be worth seeking further support for.
That's really fascinating. I think looking for those clues in terms of your life on the outside, how it's affecting your life day to day. Do you think that sometimes people don't, sometimes, I don't know, if we can slip into a lower mood, and I know lots of people are like this, and I'm a bit like this, where if I'm in a low mood, I can't imagine ever having felt okay. It's really all consuming. If I'm feeling anxious, it's like, I can't remember a time when I wasn't anxious. And I suppose that's one of the kind of tricks that these things, these mental issues kind of play on us. But do you think it's true that people can almost not realize that that's happening, that they're kind of getting into a lower mood or getting into a more anxious state?
I mean, it's certainly it can be something that creeps up on them. It might be that they do notice kind of subtle signs, but they're quick to dismiss them because they get wrapped up in sort of the fast pace of life. And as lockdown restrictions are easing, maybe some of what they're feeling gets lost in that. I found it really interesting over the last 10 weeks that a lot of the time people have been forced to take stock of how they're feeling. You know, this is the first time in a long while where people aren't facing sort of the rat race of everyday life, of the busy commutes, dropping the kids off at school, and actually they're forced to kind of sit with how they're feeling for the first time. And that can be really, really frightening, really, really overwhelming. And I think, you know, as much as it might be down to you to kind of think about what's changed or how you're feeling, actually thinking about your relationships with other people. And it may be that a family member notices that you're not quite right, or it might be a colleague or a friend, because now we're in a position where we can actually meet up with friends. So I think it's really important. My underlying message is actually kind of to shine the spotlight on yourself, what's changed, what's different, what are you struggling with, but also to be mindful of what's going on around you as well, because it may be that someone else shares that they're a bit worried about you, or that they've noticed something's changed, that may force you to take action.
Yeah, I wonder, as lockdown is easing, if people will notice changes going back out into the world. Because I guess, is it hard to compare your life, your normal life, with lockdown life, because it is so different? And actually maybe people will have realizations or decide to make big changes in their lives because of what they've experienced. They've had a taste of not having to get on the tube every day, or wanting to make changes in that way.
Absolutely. And the other thing is, we're kind of reflecting a lot on the negatives, but a lot of people will gain quite a lot of positives from being in lockdown. Actually, it may have forced them to reevaluate what's important to them. You know, what relationships are important to them. Is getting the commute to work, is that worth it? Is the payoff worth it? It may be that actually for the first time they've been able to incorporate some regular exercise and movement into their day, because normally it's a toss-up between the commute or, you know, having a really good workout to set them up for the day. It may be that they've been able to just enjoy the art of home cooking or cooking for family. So I think often we are hearing these more positive stories coming out of lockdown, of what it's allowed people to consider what's important to them and to those around them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, yeah, let's try and focus on some of the positive things that are coming out of it. I loved your book, by the way, The
Thank
Mind
you.
Medic. Your Five Senses Guide to Leading a Calmer, Happier Life. It's not only a really beautiful book, beautiful colours and illustrations, but it's extremely relatable. I love some of the case studies that you share that are so relatable and interesting, and just the really practical nature of it, where you're really taking people through, different areas of their lives and giving them strategies to help them. Can you tell us a bit about your book and how it came about, and what does it mean, the five senses? Can you explain that?
Thank you so much for that feedback, first of all. I think for me it was really important to pull people in with personal stories, because I could sit there and share lots of practical tips and tools that I think would be helpful, but actually unless you can relate to some of the difficulties that are being described, it's really hard for you necessarily to implement them. So I think actually having the hook of the case studies is really, really important, because it demonstrates actually how useful these strategies can be and the payoff in the long run. So the five senses really came about because I was getting a lot of people coming into clinic that were saying, I'm feeling down, I'm feeling anxious, but I can't quite place my finger on why I'm feeling the way I do. So I thought of a strategy that would mean that they would be able to pinpoint life stresses that could have a role to play in why they're feeling the way they do. So I would ask them, is there anything that you've seen, heard, felt, smelt, or tasted that could explain why you're feeling the way you do? And actually, very easily, they could list a couple of things that were going on for them. So, for instance, the sense of sight chapter covers areas such as social media, screen use, the people that you see, body image, all things that we come into contact with every day of our lives that we probably take for granted, or it has just become normalized, that we don't necessarily put two and two together, that may have a role to play in how we're feeling. The sense of hearing, so that covers the way we talk to ourselves or listening to our internal no. The sense of feeling is feeling imperfect or feeling underconfident or feeling that you're under pressure and how you lighten the load. Your sense of smell covers areas such as self-care, and it also covers something, so I look at smell in the hypothetical sense, so smelling the BS. So this idea that online,
I love that bit.
there's this idea that online and offline, for some reason, we can't seem to rationalize the information that's presented to us, that when people are selling us an idea, a belief, even a product, that they must be right, that actually what they're selling to us must be true. And actually what I force people to do in that section is to really critically evaluate the information that's being presented to them and the impact that it has on them as well. And then finally, the sense of taste looks at areas such as our relationship with food, and also things like caffeine, which we know, I'm someone that I really struggle with my caffeine use, but I know that it's not necessarily good for me. And finally, taste in the hypothetical sense, so thinking about revenge, so revenge tastes sweet, and why anger often does get a bit of a bad rap, but anger is actually a means of communicating an underlying emotion. And actually, what I force people to evaluate in that chapter is, what is your anger or other people's anger really trying to communicate? So the book really delves deep into all those areas. That's just a snapshot of some of the areas that I cover. And then more than that, I include ask yourself sections within the book. So the ask yourself sections, you might say on face value, oh, well, screen use isn't a problem for me, or actually I'm quite content in my friendships and relationships. But those sections really allow you to sit and evaluate in depth how those issues are serving you. And it might be by the end of it, you think, oh, actually, maybe my screen use is a bit more problematic, or maybe actually when I do spend time with this particular individual, I leave feeling a bit more on edge, a bit more anxious. And then the 5 sense challenge is about linking the two. So once you recognize that something is a difficulty for you, the 5 sense challenge encourages you to incorporate a small change into your life every day. And the way we measure the progress is through my well-being thermometer. So I have a well-being thermometer dotted around the book, and I give the readers the opportunity to measure their well-being temperature. So it might be that your screen use, so for me, I know sometimes my screen use can be a red, which is, it can sometimes generate quite negative feelings that get in the way. It forces me to procrastinate from what I'm meant to be doing, or I can find myself feeling really enraged or socially comparing myself to other people. But once I incorporate the 5 sense challenge around screen use, I might find that I come down to a blue and a green, where it's actually not detrimental, where I'm able to get along with my day without being distracted by my screens. So, I hope it's going to be a book that's going to be really practical, lots of tips and tools. And it's not a cookie cutter plan. So it's not a case that I'm presenting one plan for every individual. It really empowers the reader to generate a plan that's really bespoke and individual to them.
Amazing. Yeah, I definitely recommend listeners check that out. It's out on the 16th of July. I think it'll be perfect for the Calmer You listeners.
Okay.
You mentioned there about the screen time thing. And I don't know if you found this, but I found that it's one of those things maybe a bit like alcohol and smoking, where if you suggest to someone that they maybe are using their screen too much, it's kind of like you're taking or like your coffee, you're taking their coffee away from them. And I notice it in myself being like, I don't even want to admit that that's a problem. Or is that, I don't know if that's because we're kind of hooked on it. So we're in denial somehow. But I think at the moment we probably are using our screens more than ever. And you mentioned comparison there. Do you have any sort of advice for people who maybe are starting to recognize that their screen time is kind of getting out of control, or for people who are getting themselves into that social comparison that you mentioned?
I always have a rule first thing on the morning that I do not look at my phone until I'm fully showered, dressed, had my breakfast, done what I need to do. Because you can imagine that if you're sat in bed and you reach for your phone, you're checking emails, phone calls, text messages that have come in overnight, and then you decide to scroll through your social media, and you're immediately met with someone's sweaty post-workout selfie, or someone's divine smoothie bowl, or the fact that someone's actually already on their way to the office or fired up their computer and sent 100 emails. And you're sat there in your pajamas, instantly that comparison is set up the moment you wake up. So what I always ask people to do is actually get yourself sorted, ready on a morning before you even reach for that phone. So allow that hour literally just to be for yourself. I also would ask people, what is it that you're using your screen use for? And again, in the chapter on screen use, I look at screen use in 3 different ways. So there's a screen use that is the non-negotiables, the things that you absolutely have to do. So it might be that you have to send a work email, or that you have to send a text to a friend because you're going to be meeting up later. Those are the things that you can't negotiate. You do need to use your screens to use that. Then there's the things called the like to do. So I know for me, I love nothing more than sitting down on an evening and watching a box set, or I love firing up an audiobook or a podcast on my way to work. Those are the things that I really enjoy and I get real pleasure from. And then finally, there's the not entirely necessaries. So we've all been there when you're sat, not doing very much, and you reach for your phone and you're not really sure why you've reached for it, but you kind of commit to it. And before you know it, you've wasted 20, 30 minutes of just mindless scrolling, mindless consumption. So I would ask people, think about your screen use in those 3 categories. And what will happen is every time you reach for your phone, I want you to ask yourself, is this something that's a non-negotiable? Is this something that I like to do? Or am I going down the route of something that's not entirely necessary that may well not serve me? And actually, the moment you do that, it does stop you in your tracks, because you suddenly realize, actually, I'm just picking up my phone for the sake of it. There's no action that I'm going to be taking from picking up my phone. So it kind of creates this discipline around it. And, a lot of people might be listening and saying, well, actually, I don't have a problem with screen use. I think it's only really in the cases where you find that picking up your screens, you're pulled into social comparisons, you feel more anxious. Maybe you're struggling with sleep because you're not turning off your screens until last thing on night, and then you're trying to hit your head to the pillow and trying to force yourself to sleep. So again, within the book, I talk about the well-being thermometer and getting people used to thinking about their screen use and how problematic it is, and then encouraging those small practical solutions to see whether or not that makes a difference to how they're feeling.
It's such a vulnerable time in the morning when we first woken up. I know that it's like, I don't want to be putting anything negative or stressful into my mind for the first few minutes, particularly because I've had times where I've read my emails and suddenly been full of adrenaline at 6 a.m. and felt like I had to get on with things. And then can't meditate, and because my mind's kind of in this anxious state. So yeah, I love that idea of, yeah.
And that's the problem, is when you're checking your emails first thing on the morning, it creates that sense of urgency that you have to act on it straight away before you've done everything else to kind of make you feel half normal. So it's absolutely for that reason that what you don't want to do is offset the meditation that's really important to you, or having a really nice leisurely shower, because the pace of your morning is suddenly dictated by something that's come through on your screen.
Yeah, such an important thing to remember. I love those questions, just to prompt yourself to just question whether it is a non-negotiable, whether it is that important. I found myself yesterday, I became aware that my computer was loading slightly slowly, and I literally couldn't wait like the 2 seconds for my computer to load. So I picked up my phone. I made a promise to myself, if my computer's being slow, that I'm just going to sit with it and not, because I'm in such a rush. Well, I must have been in such a rush yesterday that I couldn't like wait for 2 seconds. So slowing down and just allowing myself to be a bit more. Another topic that I really wanted to ask you about, and that you include in your book, is the topic of saying no. And this is something that is very close to my heart, and also something that I struggle with from time to time. What is your take on saying no? What sort of ideas and advice do you have around that?
I think saying no is also something that I really struggle with, because I think saying no conjures up this idea that I'm being selfish, that I'm just me, that I'm being unhelpful. And that can be a really difficult thing to sit with. But actually, when we say yes to something, when we really mean no, we can end up taking on more than perhaps we can handle. We may risk burnout. We may actually end up resenting the person that's got us to say yes in the first place. So the way I look at saying no, so I kind of give this analogy within the book, which is around going on holiday, which seems like a bit of a distant thought at the moment, given we're in lockdown. But I just want you to imagine for a second that I've agreed that we're going to go on holiday, and we've picked the destination. We decided we're going to go to a nice sunny beach. And so we go back, we pack everything that we need, got our tickets ready, go to the airport, checked our bags in, and then we're on our way to the gate. And then someone stops us in our tracks and says, Sarah, clever, you don't want to be going here. You want to be going to this destination instead. So what would you say in that situation?
No.
And then an alternative scenario is, right, I want to go on holiday. I'm not really sure where. Let's just pack for every eventuality, and we'll meet each other at the airport. We'll have a look at the departures board, and we'll decide what takes our fancy. So we get to the departures board, and we're just pondering over the options that there are there. And the same person comes up to us and says, oh, you want to check this place out? What would we say in that scenario?
Well, I guess we might be more likely to say yes, because we haven't made our decision. We don't really know what we want.
So you just think, actually, what is the difference in those two scenarios? With the first scenario, we were very clear about what our intentions were, what we wanted. We were prepared for this sunny holiday, and therefore we packed accordingly. So the fact that someone presented an opportunity to us that went against everything that was important to us made it easier for us to say no. However, when someone catches us off guard, when perhaps we're not really clear about what our intentions are or what we want, we've kind of come half prepared, actually it's much easier to be swayed into saying yes. So the exercise within the book on saying no really forces you to evaluate what's important to you personally, what's important to you in terms of your social life, what's important to you in thinking about things like work and educational opportunities. And it makes you consider, actually, if someone presents an opportunity that goes against everything that's important to you, what's the pressure in saying yes to that individual? And so I think what's really important for people to bear in mind is actually saying no is really more about self-preservation, especially if saying yes is going to burden you, make you feel anything other than calm and happy, and is not going to serve you in the long run as well.
Yeah, I hate that feeling of having agreed to do something and then the day rolls around where that thing has come along and I'm just feeling like, oh, why did I say yes to
Yeah.
this? I've got so many other things that I need to do or so many things that I'd rather do. And these days I'm trying just to have almost having no as being my policy answer to most things to do with work. And then if it's a really good opportunity, I'll say yes to it, I'll consider it. But I have to, for my own well-being, have a sort of blanket no to most things and then occasionally saying yes. But it's such a tricky one, I think, especially for women where we're raised to be good girls and we feel like I relate to what you said about feeling like it's selfish or I've got to say, I've looked through my emails earlier and I realized I've got to say no to some kind of event that I've been invited to. But what's going through my mind is, oh, she's going to think I'm too big for my boots. She's going to think, like, who does she think she is?
But
But I'm going to do it.
the other thing to bear in mind is by someone asking you whether you want to be involved in something, whether you want to come to an event, they're effectively giving you a choice. So it shouldn't come to a surprise that actually part of that choice might be someone saying no. It's not like they're saying you must come to this event and you're turning around saying no. Actually, they're giving you a choice in the matter. And I think that's the thing that's really, really important to bear in mind. And the other thing, often people will say yes to situations because it will serve them in the long run. So for instance, it was a while ago when I got married, but I know that I would say yes to working extra shifts because I knew that I had a wedding to save up for. So in that moment, as much as I would love to have said no, I know that saying yes is going to serve me in the long run. It means that the thing that's important to me, having a lovely wedding, inviting all my friends and family, was important to me. So in that situation, I had to say yes when maybe I did want to say no. So one of the things that I look at again is where saying yes may actually where saying yes might influence kind of the things that are important to you a bit further down the line.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I guess it comes back to recognizing what's important and really thinking about what you want in the first instance, so that can guide your decisions on what you're saying yes to and what you're saying no to.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Can you share about the worry dump method? I know that people listening, worrying is likely to be a big issue. I think that certainly from the people that I speak to, overthinking, not being able to switch off, worrying, kind of thoughts that go round and round and round, the same thoughts day after day. Can you share a bit about that method for us?
Yeah. So I think worry is such a common emotion, even more so at the moment. And again, what I was finding is that worry doesn't necessarily serve us. Worry can be all consuming. It can consume our time and energy. And what I wanted to do is I wanted people to feel empowered to acknowledge they were worrying, but have the courage to say, I'll worry about this later, rather than allow it to eat into their day or consume any more of their time and energy. So as an example, let's just take, for instance, us recording. So a worry of mine might be, I'm not really sure whether or not this recording is going to record, or I'm worried that my Zoom might play up, or that Chloe hasn't sent me a link. I can turn that worry into a problem that I can solve by emailing you and saying, oh, what's the link for our chat? How do I need to be prepared? And do you have a list of questions that you can send to me? So immediately, rather than allow that worry to consume me, saying, oh, I'm not sure what Chloe's going to ask me. Am I going to be any good? How do I know that the connection's going to run or that the sound recording is going to be a good quality? Instantly, I can nip that worry in the bud and say, right, I'm going to turn that into a problem that I can solve. I might not worry is something along the lines of, oh God, what happens if Chloe just thinks I'm, really boring and that I've got nothing interesting to say, and she might just stop the recording halfway because she just thinks actually nothing that I say is of any value. You can see how that can quickly snowball, and it might get in the way of me being able to do the other worry, the sort of the problem-solving worry. And it can consume a lot of time and energy. It might lead me to become very sort of negative, and that negative self-talk is really quite damaging. So rather than just allow myself to worry about that unconditionally, I acknowledge that I'm worrying about something, but I label it as a might not worry. So actually, Chloe might not think I'm boring. Chloe might not just stop the recording, but I postpone it to later. So I have this set time in the evening called a worry curfew. So for me, it's 7:30 when I put my little girl to bed, where I list down in the day any worries that would not serve me immediately, that I can't readily turn into a problem. So every time a worry crops up into my mind, the first thing I ask myself is this a worry that I can turn into a problem that I can solve? If it is, great, just solve the problem there and then. If it's not, just label it. Say, this is a might not worry. I'm going to jot this down on the notes section of my phone or in your journal, whichever you prefer. And I'm going to come back to this later in the evening. So by the end of the day, come your worry curfew, you've generated a list of worries that might not have even happened. So for me, if we take my might not worry of Chloe thinking I'm really boring, actually, I can just cross that off and thinking, actually, worrying about that wouldn't have changed anything. Or actually, we had a really, really positive discussion. I really enjoyed myself. So immediately you feel empowered, the fact that you didn't allow that worry to run away with you. And so you allow yourself half an hour to kind of work your way through that list of worries and ask yourself, what would worrying about this during the day, if I'd allowed myself to, got in the way of? Would it have got in the way of you knuckling down and doing your work? Would it have got in the way of actually positive connections with, friends, family members? And then once that worry curfew is over, delete the note section on your phone, or scrunch up the piece of paper, chuck it in the bin, and return and do the same thing the following day. So the idea being that by the end of that sort of days, weeks of practicing that, you get very good at compartmentalizing your worry. You get very good at recognizing what worries are going to serve you in the immediate and what worries are not going to serve you, which is a really, really empowering feeling.
I really like that idea of scrunching it up and putting it in the bin, actually, of just being able to kind of, get rid of it afterwards. That sounds quite cathartic in itself. And I suppose, knowing that we can do something about some of those worries, I think is empowering. As you say, we don't have to just ruminate over and over again. That kind of momentum that comes with taking some action and feeling a bit of control over something that can seem quite out of control when it's in our heads. I love that idea. I think that's a really powerful tool. I was really curious to know how you take care of your own mental well-being. Are there certain practices and things that you incorporate into your own life?
So for me, exercise is number one. So I don't mean kind of exercise is necessarily having to do a HIIT workout or whatever, but any form of movement in the day. And I think that's the thing that maybe lockdown has taught me to be better at, because I would be commuting to a clinic and then I'd be quite sedentary most of the day, because I'd be sat at my desk and then I'd be seeing patients. And during my lunch hour, I'd be one of those people that would have lunch at my desk. There was not much movement. But actually, over the last 10 weeks, I've been really disciplined about getting outside and just moving, really looking forward to family walks with my husband and my daughter. I've been really relishing those opportunities because it's so, so important. I think all too often, exercise can have this really bad rap of being only for aesthetic purposes, but actually think about sort of the mental health benefits that you stand to gain from exercise. And for me, I know, particularly if I do it first thing on the morning, it just sets me up for the day. It gives me more energy. It lifts my mood, improves my focus. And I think it definitely helps with my sleep later on as well. So I think exercise definitely, and just time with my daughter as well. I do enjoy those kind of things like baking and not feeling so rushed as well. So that's really important to me.
Yeah, I love how lockdown has shown us, how important these kind of simple things in life that don't have to cost anything, don't involve going on holiday or spending money or doing anything. It's just spending time with each other or being outside in nature. I think it's helping us to connect to all those things. So it's only a good thing.
Absolutely.
Is there anything that you're struggling with at the moment? And how are you kind of handling that?
So I think obviously pre-lockdown, I work full time, and often I call on my mother-in-law, who's so, so supportive. She only lives down the road, to help out with childcare. And because she's in the vulnerable group, we've not been able to utilize that. And so it's kind of getting used to not being afraid to delegate to my husband, which sounds ridiculous, but he works really long hours. He's very busy. But often what we were finding is the pattern of me doing the drop-offs and pickups, and if I couldn't do it, getting his mom to do it instead, it was just kind of a bad habit that we'd fallen into. And actually, what's really quite good is that by saying to him, look, you're going to have to muck in and help out a bit more, has been really empowering. And also for him has been really great, because actually he's really enjoyed doing the drop-offs and pickups. I think he's, by his own admission, got a bit lazy, thinking, oh, well, my mum really likes to do it, and actually that's grandma, granddaughter time, which is lovely. But actually, I think it's made him evaluate as well that time in the car with our daughter sort of nattering in the background is stuff that he had missed out on. So for me, I think not being afraid to delegate or to say, look, I'm doing X, Y, and Z, so you need to kind of pull your weight and do this as well. Because I think communication is absolutely key. I could just sit on it and just dwell and think, oh God, he's not pulling his weight, he's not doing what I want him to. But how is that situation going to improve unless we communicate about it? So I think for me, I could have got myself potentially in a situation where I didn't delegate. And again, I focus on this within the book about how we deal with pressure and feeling under pressure, feeling the need to do everything ourselves because we'll do it better or no one can do it as well as we can, but actually letting go of some of that to help us in the long run. And so that's something that I've definitely benefited from.
Right. Yeah. I know that my partner has gotten better at tidying and cleaning in lockdown. It was not something he was that familiar with before, but I think he is learning. So it's good. We're learning things about our partners and ourselves and improving our communication. It's all good. Amazing. Thank you so much for everything that you shared today. It's been so helpful. Where can people find out more about you, buy your book, anything else that you're up to at the moment?
So I'm mostly on Instagram, and my handle's @themindmedic. And generally I'll post lots of tips and tools on that most days. And any events I'm doing, that'll be really the first place to go. And you can buy my book. It's available on pre-order, but it's available to order on Amazon, available WH Smith, Waterstones, and all good bookshops as well.
Amazing. Yeah. So thank you so much for speaking to me today.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for having me on.